Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.
The National Weather Service.
Hello and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Kimberly Hoeppner, and today's February 21st, 2014. Remember, when we're not on air, you can always check out our website by going to arh.noaa.gov, or you can always call our weather information hotline at 1-800-472-0391. And also you can type in the weather.gov site and navigate to the destination of your choice in Alaska. And don't forget, we're always on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, which can be found on our social pages on the National Weather Service home site for Alaska. Now on to the important information of the day. We have some watches, warnings, and advisories out across the western part of the coast. We have some winter weather that's going to be bringing the possibility for freezing rain across the Bristol Bay here. So there's an advisory out for freezing rain for this evening starting at 4 p.m. today. And we also have an advisory out for the Bethel area and Kuskokwim Delta, as we can see some blowing snow and freezing rain in these areas as some warm weather surges northward, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Along the rest of the western coast, expect wintry precipitation. We have a blizzard warning out across the Bering Strait, including Sir Lawrence Island. And we also have some winter weather advisories in store for you tomorrow on Saturday when that warm air comes north. So we have some ice warnings out across just south of the Seward Peninsula, and on to the north we have ice advisories, winter storm advisories, all through the Kotzebue Sound area. Now onto the satellites and take a look at the systems that are going to be bringing this precipitation, especially across the western coastal areas. A front has pushed up through the Alaska Peninsula, and you can see this plume of moisture. Yesterday we had a low circulation that was across the western part of the Bering, and this is now dropped further to the southwest. I'll put that in motion, and you can see that moisture streaming ahead of a front that's wrapped around all the way across the central part of the Bering. Looping that one more time, you can see the moisture that's going to be pulled up and across towards the Bering Strait later on today. Taking a closer look at home, if you're across the central and eastern areas, the moisture is mainly confined across the Alaska Peninsula and the southwestern coast, as the front had made it through the Bristol Bay area. The western capes had seen some very gusty winds and mainly just snow falling across the Bristol Bay area, and rain as you went further south across the Alaska Peninsula. Mainly across the northern parts of the state, we saw some cloudy conditions with a colder air mass in place there, some showery conditions across Shemya. Let's watch this moisture as it kind of streams out ahead across the Alaska Peninsula and the southwestern areas. Some moisture making it on around towards the southern part of the Gulf of Alaska, with Kodiak seeing some drying out behind that initial frontal wave. Okay, so here's a wrap-up summary of today. Here's the mix of precip along the leading edge of the front that's draped across or just north of the Pribilof Islands. The frontal boundary is also helping to stream up this moisture along a jet over the Alaska Peninsula, so they're in pretty pretty continuous rainfall in this area, some scattered showers along the Kodiak Island area and some scattered shower activity along a dissipating low that's across the southeastern part of the Gulf of Alaska. Mainly clouds, like I said, just across the interior and northern parts of the state with a cold air mass in place, but the northwestern coast will see their fair share of wintry precip as we go through the day tomorrow. Across the other half of the Bering, we still have some snow showers continuing on the backside of the low that has some colder air advecting behind this system. And then as we look at your weather for tonight, this rain is going to stay across the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island. As the next wave pushes north, we'll see rain probably heavy at times, and then we'll see that changeover from snow to rain eventually, but not before we see some possible pockets of freezing rain, mainly from Dillingham and westward. Across the Kuskokwim Delta up through the Yukon, expect that changeover to be a little bit slower as the front nearly stalls during the nighttime hours and then begins to pull north. So expect a chance to see snow and freezing rain. Pockets of freezing rain here are possible too. Very gusty conditions are going to set up across the Kodiak area, Alaska Peninsula, and along the western coast all the way up to the Kotzebue Sound area. As this front begins to push northward, the high pressure is going to keep it from making any progress, therefore tightening the gradient. And along the backside of the low pressure system, we're going to see gusty winds all along here as the gradient, and it wraps up around itself. Here's another cold front that's pushing through as the cold air is making it on the south side of the low center. But in between the systems, fairly moderate conditions between 30 and 45 degrees across the south, so mainly rain in between the two systems. As we head into your Saturday forecast, the next low will begin to push north, having some showery conditions making its way up across the southeastern Gulf, mainly near the Dixon entrance if they see any showers. But all the rain, the precipitation will be stretching across the western coastal areas. So be on the lookout for some gusty winds, some very heavy precip continuing to track across the Alaska Peninsula and the western parts of Bristol Bay mainly. And as you head further inland, the precip will become more showery, and then the change over to a wintry mix along the west coast. As we go through the day, this warm air will be pulled up ahead of this low pressure center, making all the way up towards Kotzebue Sound, and therefore be on the lookout for some freezing rain and ice accumulations on a ground that was very hard frozen, as temperatures have been well below zero the past few days. So warming up to near zero with a very warm air mass that's flowing over top is going to make quite a mess for some people. Gusty winds all the way through will be between 40 and 50 miles per hour, with some gusts along the channel terrain areas of the Alaska Peninsula around 60 miles per hour. The backside of the low pressure will continue to bring some snow along here and showery conditions for much of the Aleutians. For the eastern and northern interior parts of the state, we'll stay under mostly cloudy conditions, and the cold air will stay in place here. And while the southeastern areas or the northern Gulf might see some breaks in the sun early in the day tomorrow before this next low pressure system makes its way north and brings some moisture back into the southern parts of the Gulf. As we head into your Sunday forecast, notice how everything is becoming more broken along the western coast, so showery precipitation, a mix of rain and snow across the eastern parts of the Bering, with some freezing precip still probably lingering around the Kotzebue Sound and the Seward Peninsula. So stay on the lookout for that, and some gusty winds will continue across the eastern parts, at least, of the Alaska Peninsula, on across towards Kodiak Island and the western parts of the Gulf. Low pressure will be on the slow rise towards the southeastern areas and might see a few showers by the end of Sunday, making it up near the Dixon entrance and on into Juneau possibly. But north across the Lynn Canal, Skagway area should see some clearing part of the day, so it should be a nice day there. Warmer air is going to be on the trend on Sunday as it continues to bring warm air ahead of these low pressure systems that are tracking north across the Bering. However, there will be a stalled front keeping temperatures cold across the Arctic areas, with gusty winds down through the strait. Across the western parts of the Bering, the low pressure is going to continue on a slow westerly track, but is going to continue to bring showery type conditions all the way through the eastern part of the Aleutians. Now looking at your temperatures for the day, rather warm temperatures were across the Alaska Peninsula, beating out the southeastern areas that hung out in the low to mid 30s during the day. And then across the northern Gulf waters saw a range between 25 to 36 degrees over the North Gulf waters, and a quick change, gradient to near 0 degrees as you went across the Copper River Basin and north up through the Tanana Valley, another gradient change to below 20 degrees. Across the Arctic coastal areas, temperatures dropping down to minus 30 degrees and below near Dead Horse was at minus 33 degrees. And along the northwestern coastal areas, still fairly cold, just below 0, and near minus 20 across the northern part of the Seward Peninsula. Dropping across the southwest and the Alaska Peninsula, here's where you see the gradient that's going to make a difference for the wintry precip. Starting off temperatures this afternoon near 10 to 15 degrees, and then across Bristol Bay you see a changeover with temperatures nearing 30 degrees. Across the Alaska Peninsula, they're already warm in the lower 40s to mid 40s. We saw 45 at Cold Bay today and Sand Point. Across the Pribilofs, 35 to 38 degrees with a little bit moderate temperatures across the eastern and central Aleutians, dropping down into the mid 30s. They're only going to cool a few degrees in the lower 30s overnight, with mid 30s across much of the peninsula. The southwest areas will see temperatures ranging from 20 to 30 to near freezing as you go south near Kodiak. Across the northwestern parts of the state, they're going to stay pretty much the same in the minus 10 degree to minus 25 degree range, and then a little bit cooler across the northeastern parts of the state and interior. The coldest probably around Arctic Valley near minus 40, dropping south towards the coastal areas back to near 20 along the northern Gulf, and in the upper teens to mid 20s across the southeast. Now looking at your highs tomorrow, in the upper 30s across the southeast and all along the Gulf Coast waters, very warm across the Alaska Peninsula, and climbing up to near 0 in much of the northeastern areas, and freezing and just above by the time we get through tomorrow afternoon. Temperatures across the Aleutian chain will be in the mid 30s, primarily coolest temperatures in the lower 30s across the western Aleutians. Now the flying weather for tomorrow is mainly going to be MVFR conditions all across the Bering Sea, the Aleutian chain, and the southwestern areas of the state, with some MVFR conditions across the southern Gulf where that low pressure is swinging across towards the Dixon entrance. IFR conditions across the Alaska Peninsula and parts of the southwest and along the western coast. And taking a look at your passes individually, we have Anatuvik Pass, which will be VFR, and Adigan Pass will be VFR as well. And Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will be MVFR through the day, and Rainy Pass will be MVFR. Looking at Windy Pass will be VFR, and Isabel will be MVFR to VFR. Mentasta will be VFR all day, and Tanita Pass will go MVFR to VFR later. Portage Pass may start out at IFR in the morning and then clear to VFR, and Chilkoot and White Pass should be MVFR in the morning, clearing to VFR in the afternoon. Looking at your freezing levels, mainly across the central parts of the Bering, dropping towards Shimia, and all hugging the northern Gulf down through the southeast, 2,000-foot levels across the southern part of the Gulf, and reaching all, for tomorrow morning, reaching all the way towards the southwestern areas and 6,000 feet as you head towards Kodiak, so real warm air there. Okay, icing tomorrow will mainly be across the Bering and Aleutian, Alaska Peninsula, but below 10,000 feet for these areas. The jet stream tomorrow strongest across the southern part of the chain at 170 knots, 130 knot jet pulling the moisture up ahead of this ridge that's going to be over much of the state, southerly flow across the southeast as it rounds a low that's just over the lower 48. Now looking at your tomorrow, 9,000-foot winds, the main focus is going to be on this low pressure system tomorrow, with the strongest winds at 60 to 65 knots as it approaches the Alaska Peninsula and the southwestern areas, 60 to 65 knots out of the south, and then rounding the northern part of the state out of the west at 20 knots, and another stronger flow area just off the southeastern waters between 35 and 40 knots, like I said, just in the southeastern part of the Gulf waters. Now tomorrow, your 3,000-foot winds are also going to be strong across the southwest between 50 and 75 knots as it streams north, turning around this low pressure system in the Gulf waters, and then 40 knots just to the south of this low pressure system. Now we should see mainly a southerly flow across the rest of the state with a northerly flow going across the southeast between around 25 knots. And then tomorrow's turbulence will be the focus around that low pressure system again out in the Bering with possible occasional conditions across the eastern part of the Bering. All right, in just a few moments we'll be back with your marine forecast.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of Alaska Public Media and the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, welcome to Hangar Flying. This evening, our guest is John Henry. I first met John at the Safety Foundation Fall Seminar last November. At the time, John told me that he had previously had an engine failure in his Cessna 185, and he agreed to come on our show and talk about it. First, a little background. John came to Alaska in 1972 with the Army. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
John decided he wanted to fly, so he used his VA benefits and started flying with the Elmendorf Aero Club, ultimately earning his private, commercial instrument, MEI, and CFI. I'm going to quit talking and let John talk about his engine failure. Welcome, John.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Set the stage for us.
My dad and I were coming back from Lake Creek in June, the middle of June, and we were coming back, just going back to Anchorage at about 10:30 at night. We were about 1,500 feet. We were talking to approach, and we were cleared to contact Merrill. We switched over, and as soon as I mentioned to Merrill we were off approach, inbound to land, boom, there was this loud bang, and I heard this rattling sound, and it was like, oh my gosh, this ain't happening to me. What's going on here? So you do go brain dead, and I did go brain dead for a few seconds there, it seemed like anyway. And as I surveyed out in front of me, I noticed that there were some clearings out there, and I was getting ready to do that, and suddenly my dad said, there's a road over there. So I turned around and I noticed the road. And in the meantime, I don't know if I really checked all the fuel or did the things that they say you're supposed to do, but I did do something. I pushed the throttle in, nothing happened. I realized right away with a big bang and the noise that I needed to fly the airplane. And that's what I proceeded to do. I made the left-hand turn. I remember Merrill calling or somebody saying something, and just before I made the left-hand turn, I realized that this was going to hurt. My dad is 81 years old, and I'm thinking, we're going to need to get somebody here quick time. So I reached over and I punched 7700 in on the transponder, and then I forgot about everything else and just flew the airplane. We made a left-hand turn. I picked up the road. I paralleled the road and did the thing they teach you, the left-hand turn, the key position, and then I just maneuvered accordingly. And we ended up putting it right down where I wanted to put it, and we were right on the center of the road when it was all over with.
And you opened the door and stepped out and everything was fine.
No, we just sat there for a while, kind of like, what was that all about? So it was pretty exciting. My heart was starting to go then. That's when things started racing a little bit, and that's how it happened.
It's interesting the way you describe the sound, because Will Johnson from UDair Taxi was on a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about an engine failure he had this summer in a 206. And the same thing happened. The crankshaft came apart. And he described it as the sound that you make as a kid when you put playing cards on your spokes so they'd kind of clatter. And he said that's how he described what probably was about the same similar thing that you had. Well, it's obvious to me you did the right thing, and I think we've talked about this, but I think one of the things that you stress is how important it is to practice.
Yes.
Practice. Can you talk about that?
I think it's very important to practice, because after this all happened, I've thought about it it's been a couple of years now since that happened in June, and I think the thing that really helped me the most is the fact that I stay proficient, I practice, and every flying scenario you can practice. So you practice a little something or another, whatever it might be, it's practice. And I know that that is what was the foremost thing that came to mind when I was making my approach to the road, is that sight picture and everything I've seen many, many times. And it's like, it wasn't difficult. It just wasn't difficult, because I think that made it a lot easier.
So sight picture probably probably didn't focus much on the airspeed. It was just what
No, it's what I see outside. I fly the aircraft by feel a lot, and what I see and attitude and things like that. And my concentration was nailing that, freezing that endpoint in the windshield, and whatever it took to freeze that point to get it down where I wanted to put it was what I was concentrating on. And if I needed flaps to do it, I'd apply flaps. If I didn't need flaps, I'd even take them off. So whatever it took is what I did to get it to that point. But I think my practice paid off. I can't even describe it.
You know what, we're just about out of time, John. I'd like to get you on next time. So I've got a couple more questions, and I know that the audience is going to be interested in hearing what you have to say. So appreciate you being on tonight, and if you can come back next time, we'll continue where we're left off.
Thank you. I appreciate being here, and I hope whatever I have to say helps.
Thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this, and remember that hanger flying and the other things that the Safety Foundation offers are as a result of your membership and your support. So please make sure you've renewed for 2014. Tune in next time, and in the meantime, fly safe.
All right, welcome back to the show, and now on to your weekend planning. All right, across the inner channels, we'll have a northerly flow, gales at 35 to 40 knots until you head towards the south, towards the Dixon entrance, out of the southeast at 25 knots, small crafts here. And all along the southeastern Gulf waters, 25 knots offshore flow out of the east and northeast, with seas between 7 and 8 feet, and along the inner channels between 5 and 8 feet, highest seas towards the north. And then looking at your Sunday forecast, a north to easterly flow all across the area, small crafts. And when you get towards the southeastern parts of the Gulf, gales here at 35 knots. The seas across the inner channels, 5 to 6 foot, and then 8 to 12 foot seas across the southeastern Gulf. Now looking at your Saturday marine forecast for the western Gulf waters out of the east between 35 and 40 knots, gale criteria across much of the area except across the Cook Inlet, 20 to 30 knots, small craft advisory at the southern inlet, 7 foot seas, and then across the Shelikof Strait, Barren Islands, 10 to 11 feet, and then 9 to 17 feet across the western parts of the Gulf waters, the highest seas as you head towards Kodiak Island. For Sunday, very much of the same flow out of the eastern and northerly direction. Stronger winds on Sunday, between 35 and 45 knots, with the strongest winds across the southern part of the Gulf and as you head towards the west. And we'll see seas here between 6 and 12 feet and 13 to 23 feet. The highest seas will be near Kodiak Island and the western Gulf. Across the Alaska Peninsula, looking at gale criteria out of the east and southeast direction for winds between 30 and 40 knots, with the highest seas across the northern Pacific between 14 and 17 feet, across the Bering between 8 and 9 feet. Looking at your Sunday forecast, change of direction on those winds, more out of the south across the Alaska Peninsula. Lighter wind speeds across the Alaska Peninsula, and we'll see between around 15 knots, and then the strongest winds will be across just south of Kodiak Island, across Bristol Bay, 40 knots gales here. And then seas will be 6 to 9 feet, 12 to 18 feet for the Pacific side. Across the Aleutian chain, we'll see small crafts all across the area between 25 and 30 knots out of the south and west direction, with seas between 9 and 13 feet along the Bering side, and the Pacific side we'll see seas around 13 to 14 feet. Now looking at your marine forecast on Saturday, small crafts, for Sunday, small crafts for the central part of the Aleutians, gales as you head towards the west out of the west direction, and more of a southwest to southerly direction, 20 knots as you head towards the east. 7 to 10 foot seas, and then as you head out towards the west, between 14 and 18 feet. Now looking at your west coastal areas out of the east direction and south as you get towards the Pribilof Islands, between 35 and 40 knots. Seas here will be between 11 and 13 feet. Higher gusts across the Bristol Bay, especially on Sunday, around 45 knots max gales all across the western coast. And the central parts of the Bering will be seeing winds between 20 and 30 knots, small craft or brisk wind advisory across the St. Matthews Island area, with freezing spray along the ice edge. Now across the northern parts of this day, we'll see the highest wind gusts across the Kotzebue Sound area, small crafts, offshore flow out of the east, and then across the northwest and the northern part of the state we'll see a east to northeasterly flow. And again on Sunday we'll see a wind increase across the west and the northwest, so northwestern areas in the Arctic coastal areas, brisk winds between 25 and 30 knots here. Now just going to recap your weather for tonight. Don't forget about the blizzard warnings across the Bering Strait and St. Lawrence Island. Gusty winds all across the western areas, with precip mainly staying rain across the Alaska Peninsula. Moderate to heavy at times there through Kodiak Island when this front pushes a little bit further north and another low pressure system swings more moisture to the north. A mix of precip across Bristol Bay and the Pribilof Islands, and a changeover eventually from the snow conditions and blowing snow conditions over to a mix of precip and pockets of freezing rain across the Kuskokwim Delta north. They're going to see some ice accumulations all across the western areas. Low pressure will stay across the Bering and sling new low pressure systems on towards the north. Weak low pressure will be able to creep up into the southeastern areas. Well, that's it for today. Hope you have a good evening and a good weekend. I'm meteorologist Kimberly Hoeppner.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.